Welcome into Duval Daily, presented by GenJag.com. I'm Jordan DeLugo. Thanks so much for tuning in here on Thursday, January 18th. Another cold morning here in Duval County, but the Jaguars defensive coordinator search, it rolls on. According to Jeremy Fowler of ESPN, Jets safeties coach Marquand Manuel is interviewing with the Jaguars today for their vacant DC job. We're going to dive into Marquand Manuel, what we're looking for in a defensive coordinator moving forward here in Jacksonville. Really appreciate y'all tuning in. If you enjoy the content, please like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. You can also check out genjag.com/shop. Pick up some new Duval gear like the hat I'm wearing right now. Really appreciate y'all being here. So I want y'all to keep in mind what I think the Jaguars should be looking for, right? It's not necessarily someone who runs this scheme or that scheme, 3-4, 4-3, man, cover 3, cover 1. Those are not the critical things. Obviously, scheme does matter. But what matters more is a coach's ability to effectively communicate, teach, and lead, right? Those are the three pillars that I think really determine how successful a coach can be. And someone who can game plan week to week and drive to drive. You have got to be able to game plan. Being static in the modern NFL, in my opinion, is death on either side of the ball. You've got to be able to switch it up. You've got to be able to throw curveballs. You've got to be able to adjust on the fly. I don't think you've seen the Jaguars do that well enough, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But whoever it is, they will need more talent than they have right now in certain areas of this roster. More talent than the last defensive coordinator was given in certain areas of that defense, right? So again, up next is Marquand Manuel, former Florida Gator DB. A lot of y'all will be familiar with. Played in the NFL almost a decade. A lot of players really respect former players as coaches, right? They want people who have been there and done that and been in their shoes. And so I think he does bring that to the table. Former Falcons defensive coordinator in 2017 and 2018 under Dan Quinn, so he has coordinated a defense in the past. Worked with Dan Quinn and Gus Bradley in Seattle before that for quite some time, so kind of comes from that Seattle coaching tree. Pretty much everyone he's worked with outside of Doug Peterson, who he worked with on the Eagles staff in 2020 as the defensive backs coach under Jim Schwartz, who was the defensive coordinator there. That's the only coaching stop that Marquand Manuel has had that was not under a Pete Carroll, Seattle cover 3 type coach, right? Jim Schwartz, more of the 4-3 man coverage, likes to blitz a ton and get the job done that way. Saw him have a big year for the Cleveland Browns. Did not end well for the Browns in the playoffs. But so you've seen mostly the Seattle cover 3 schemes for Marquand Manuel. He has been the safeties coach in New York since 2021. The reason he left Philly is because Jim Schwartz resigned from that job, wanted to take a step away for health reasons. And so that defensive staff kind of broke up. He went over to New York under Robert Saleh, again, another former Seattle coach, a guy who was a linebackers coach here as well under Gus Bradley. So again, Pete Carroll, cover 3 coaching tree, but a lot of these guys over the last several years, their schemes have evolved. Gus Bradley has probably evolved the least out of all those coaches. They run a lot more man coverage now, though, than they used to when you talk about definitely Dan Quinn in Dallas, but even in New York, the Jets have run a lot more man coverage over the last couple of years, and one of the reasons they do that is because they can. Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed, they've got talent back there, right? So I'm not sure exactly how Marquand Manuel would fall if he was the defensive coordinator. How would they be looking to deploy their secondary, their defensive front? I can tell you the defensive front would not be a 3-4 front, which I know a lot of Jags fans would be happy about, because the 3-4 fronts are when you see Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker and other edge players dropping into shallow zones and dropping into coverage more often. 4-3 base would be what Marquand Manuel would bring to the table. So again, I know some people would like that. Again, I don't think that matters as much because there should be variation in your defensive fronts. You're not in base all that much. And there is going to be variation for most teams in the league. And you see teams around the league that run a 3-4 base, like the Baltimore Ravens, have tremendous success. You see teams that run 4-3 base that have tremendous success, right? San Francisco 49ers come to mind. A lot of it is going to come down to talent and the way you coach up that talent in your specific scheme and the way you adjust, again, week to week, drive to drive, quarter to quarter. So again, I don't care that much about 3-4, 4-3, but for the people that do, Marquand Manuel would bring a 4-3 defensive front in base to Jacksonville. Most of these coaches, as I said, from the Seattle cover 3, they're a lot more aggressive than they used to be, but I still don't think you see them adjusting as well as some other coaches around the league in certain situations. It sounds like this would be another coordinator that you'd probably need to adjust your personnel on the back end a little bit. As I mentioned, a lot of cover 3 defense from the Seattle group in the past, but they have moved more towards man coverage over the years. The Jets were running man coverage over 30% of the time last year in most situations with their cornerbacks. I don't think you really have the personnel to do that here right now. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Again, I'm not a huge fan of the idea of running a Seattle-style defense in this day and age. We've seen that. We've been there. We've done that with Gus Bradley. Again, it's not going to be as static as Gus Bradley was, but that's just kind of the way I'm looking at it. He has worked with Doug Peterson before, as I mentioned, in 2020, so there is some familiarity there between he and the Jaguars head coach. I don't know if that's an advantage, disadvantage, doesn't mean anything either way, but there is some familiarity between those two. I also look at him being a former defensive coordinator, and we've talked about the idea of landing someone who's been there and done that when it comes to coordinating a defense on the NFL level. I think that can be vital. That can be very important because a lot of times if you have a offensive coach, head coach, and a defensive rookie coordinator, he's not going to be able to have that head coach really able to teach him up on how it's supposed to go on the defensive side of the ball as much from a coordination standpoint. There's so much more that goes into coordinating a defense than there is to being a positional coach. But again, Marquand Manuel, he has coordinated a defense for 2 years in Atlanta, but it was under a defensive head coach. It'll always be interesting to see when you have a coordinator coming from under the wing of a defensive head coach, a potential defensive coordinator, how that works. Like, how much control did he have of that defense? How in charge was he of that Atlanta defense? That's part of the question. The other thing is they weren't great, right? They were not great in 2017, 2018. So we'll see how it plays out here with Marquand Manuel. He's probably not the hottest name on the Jaguars defensive coordinator interview list, but a guy that brings a lot of coaching experience, a guy that brings playing experience. He has coordinated a defense. To what level? I'm not exactly sure. I think the top names you're seeing right now for the Jaguars are Ryan Nielsen, who they have been granted an interview request with. The Falcons defensive coordinator comes from the New Orleans Saints, Dennis Allen coaching tree. Chris Hewitt from the Ravens. I think anytime you have an opportunity to add someone from this Ravens staff is something you have to take serious, especially a guy that has as much respect around the league as a Chris Hewitt. And then Wink Martindale, who would be fascinating. He would be the most man-heavy coordinator that you could find. You know, they under Wink Martindale, whether it was the Ravens or the Giants last couple years, as much man coverage as you'll find in the league today. And Wink Martindale, the thing about him is he is not a game plan defensive coordinator, not a coordinator that is going to adjust a lot. He's going to run what he wants to run, which is a ton of blitzes, exotic blitzes, and man coverage. And he's going to try to force the quarterback to get the ball out quick. Really good quarterbacks at times can roast that type of defense. And you've seen that. So I still think it's really fascinating to see where the Jaguars will go with their defensive coordinator hire. Ryan Nielsen has a year of defensive coordinator experience. He coached under an offensive head coach in Atlanta last year. I think he did a lot of good things. I think he would bring an expertise as a defensive front type of guy. They do need to improve their defensive front, no doubt about it. The interior of the defensive line really struggled for the Jaguars last year, down the stretch, no doubt about it. So, again, we'll see. Fascinating stuff for the Jaguars, but Marquand Manuel Jets safeties coach, former Falcons defensive coordinator, is supposedly in town today, according to Jeremy Fowler, interviewing with the Jacksonville Jaguars for their vacant defensive coordinator job. Really appreciate y'all tuning in. If you enjoy the content, please like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. You can also check out genjag.com/shop, pick up some new Duval gear if you want to support the channel further. Y'all have a good one.